Hello, I'm Roberta Winters, President of the League of Women Voters of Radnor Township. The League has a long history of encouraging voting and informing the electorate of key issues on the ballot. Hopefully, you are aware that we have municipal elections on November 5th. Every election is important, and this one is no exception. Many of you know we'll be electing local officials, such as those that run our schools and municipalities, be they towns, cities, or boroughs. We'll also be selecting those that oversee our counties and serve in our courts. I was surprised to discover recently there is a referendum on that ballot. What's it all about? Well, to find out, I have with me Jamie Mogil, a member of the state's board of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. As a lawyer, she is especially capable in this area of policy. Welcome, Jamie. We're delighted to have you here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Roberta, for having me, and thanks for all you do for the community and the league, especially. And so, yes, I'm a lawyer. I don't know if that makes me especially capable of telling us, but yes, I'm also VP of Government and Social Policy for League, so it's my responsibility to review ballot referendums just like this and prepare our citizens before they go to vote. Just a little about me again. I also work in election reform. I was lucky enough to be 2018 Election Protection Director for our state, and that coalition of groups included the League of Women Voters. And I also work on ending gerrymandering with Fair Districts PA, and other fighting voter suppression with the League. So I'm familiar with these areas, but also about following legislation and policy.
Well, that's important because this one is a real winner. Many of us, as you recall, learned about government a long time ago, and we probably need a brief bit of a summary of how things actually get on the ballot in the referendum status.
Well, it's important to maybe contrast what we don't have in Pennsylvania. We often hear about California and all the propositions that they have. I mean, thousands of them have been passed in California for initiative and referendum, meaning they're changing the laws right by going to the ballot. We do not have that in Pennsylvania, so it's really important to contrast that. For us here in Pennsylvania, a ballot referendum comes when not one, but two consecutive sessions of our legislature pass the same bill, and then it's, quote, referred, so that's where we get the word referendum. It's referred to the ballot for us as citizens to vote on whether to amend our state constitution to include that law. Now, and it's also important that it does not go to the governor for signature as regular bills would.
So just two houses of Congress, the legislature pass it in two consecutive terms, and it's on the ballot.
Well, I wouldn't say just, but yes, it's a long process, yes. But here we are. We have something that has been referred to the ballot for our November election.
Well, I know things like this usually take a long time, and in most cases, for any kind of referendum, we've been working on fair districts for seemingly decades. But Marsy's law, which is basically another name we give to this new referendum, moved quickly with bipartisan support, and actually with over 90% of the legislators approving it. What exactly will this look like when people see the ballot on November 5th?
Sure. It's important to remember that it's language that comes before us, but it's not the full bill, right? We're only seeing a question. And that question...
So we're not seeing the whole thing. We just get a piece of it.
Correct. That language comes, it's reviewed by the Department of State and then the Attorney General, the state's Attorney General. So the question that we'll see will read as such: shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to grant certain rights to crime victims, including to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity, considering their safety in bail proceedings, timely notice and opportunity to take part in public proceedings, reasonable protection from the accused, right to refuse discovery requests made by the accused, restitution and return of property, proceedings free from delay, and to be informed of these rights so they can enforce them. And then we will be asked, do you support this? Yes, to be added and amended to our Constitution, or no.
Well, this sounds pretty simple. By voting yes on this, we'd add specific rights to crime victims in Pennsylvania, and it would be provided under the Constitution now. And if we don't like it, we vote no, and it wouldn't be added. What prompted this need for a referendum regarding crime victims in the first place?
Well, Marsy, it's let's start with Marsy. Who is Marsy? Marsy's Law came from the unfortunate circumstance that is a victim. She was a murder victim of Henry Nicholas. That was her brother. And he is a billionaire from Broadcom in California, and he put millions, almost $1 billion into this Marsy's Law for All. And the goal is to pass a victim's rights, really to enshrine them. So put them into state constitutions with the goal then to amend our U.S. Constitution. So like we know with the 19th Amendment, which passed and spread across the United States, it was then enshrined in our U.S. Constitution. So it really is a campaign, and it's a goal to put it into our U.S. Constitution.
So that's really a big deal.
Oh, yes.
So this is just a small step in a bigger dream.
Correct.
Or reality, as the case may be.
Yes, of course. Now, they would like to hope that it would be, that's their goal, to make it a reality, but we're not there yet.
Well, it did move very quickly in Pennsylvania. It was like, boom, boom. It got moved, and it had a lot of bipartisan support. How did this all happen?
Money and key high-profile people. Money in politics and lobbying is very key. We know that, look here, it's almost nearly $850,000 was spent lobbying here in Pennsylvania alone, to make sure that this bill was passed. And then you had certain high-profile figures, like our governor, supporting this, as well as the PA District Attorneys Association. So when you have and then you also had ad campaigns, they pop up on Instagram, they're on the TV. And so there's really a widespread push to pass this. And, who wouldn't want to support victims?
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. But has this, as you said, mentioned that this happened in other states. What's happened with other states when this referendum on victims' rights was put into the...
Well, as I noted, started in California, and that passed and they have a proposition, so it passed pretty quickly in 2008. And then not till 2014 did we start to see some other states be included, including Illinois, and then in 2016, Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota joined in, and then Ohio in 2017. And just last year, it doubled from 6 to 12 states that were included in supporting Marsy's Law. Now, I think we'll talk a little bit later about even states that have passed this, some have had to step back.
Well, based on what I saw, these referendums passed with strong, majorities, and it seems like it's a no-brainer. But at the same time, is there anything that currently protects people in Pennsylvania who are victims of crime?
Yes, we're fortunate here in Pennsylvania to have the Pennsylvania Crime Victims Act. Now, that it is a bit outdated, it's from 1998, but that's statutory law. It's very important to remember that that's something that's not in our state constitution, so it doesn't need to go through that process that we discussed at the beginning. And it probably does need to be updated because it's not as expansive. So, receiving basic information concerning the services available for crime victims, to be notified if something's happening in the proceedings or the trial, to have family members, victim advocates. So we do have certain protections in place by statute. But this is different. This is going beyond that. This is granting not only rights to victims, but in some cases, their family. And it's, again, putting it into our state constitution.
Well, it seems odd we would go through all this efforts for a referendum when most of what we need seems like it's already in the law under this, Pennsylvania Crime Victims Act that could be updated, but currently it's been working for a while. Are there reasons why someone would vote no on this referendum item?
Yes, yes to the no. First, as you mentioned, we already have law in place. It does need to be updated, but really going beyond the premise, right? It's hard to consider being an opponent to victims' rights, but this is not, when I'm describing why somebody would say no, I don't want it to be framed in the context of being opposed to victims' rights, because that's not what this is. But it's really about the statutory language and the procedure that's happening here. We've heard even from the governor that there's equity. They need to find equity for victims, and equating victims' rights rights with the defendant's rights. So and I'll let that sit with you, because under our U.S. Constitution, due process, certain rights are enshrined, again, in those not only 50 state constitutions, but in our U.S. Constitution, because an accused stands to lose maybe even their life, and definitely their liberty if they're going to prison, or parole, and all the things that come with that. So that's why we have those due process and certain rights. But it's this idea, it's kind of a false, it's not kind of, it is a false narrative to equate a victim with a defendant. So again, it's that statutory language, but the accused faces the government. Already there's so many setbacks, like here in Pennsylvania, we know we're the only state without any publicly funded defenders association. So right off the bat, we know that the accused already stands to not only lose their life and liberty, but really isn't equal to a victim in any way, because a victim is not taking on the government, right? They're taking on, it's a two-party versus, against the state, right? It's the victim against the defendant and vice versa, or the accused, really. So there's so many issues, not only with the language, but also the application. It's what we say in the law. It's what we see on the face, but it's also, how is it going to be implemented? And the idea that we have these new expansive requirements, going so far as to require protection of the accused, require that the victim be able to refuse a deposition or refuse to give discovery, those have far-reaching effects that can really not only hurt the defense of potentially somebody who's been wrongfully confused, right? So we need to consider that, and we also need to consider that this will be a significant burden on already cash-strapped government and law enforcement, and consider that the courts will be potentially backlogged, because if the DA's association supported this, but in very essence, they could be liable for not doing things and not just the victims, but victims' families. So there's many things to think about in the reason to say no, but I go back to, again, this is not to oppose victims and victims' rights, quite the opposite. It's to make sure that we do it correctly, and maybe that's through further education and updates to our current statute that we have, and that's why certain groups like the ACLU of Pennsylvania, as well as the the Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys of Pennsylvania, told the legislature, don't pass this bill.
Well, obviously, it is going to be on a referendum and will change what may be happening in Pennsylvania. But why is there, you've talked about all the money involved and the lobbying that's been involved with Marsy's law. Just, what does it all say? What does Marsy's law say that would attract people to its passage?
So we talked about maybe the reasons why, but that language, it's beyond the Crime Victims Act, okay?
So it goes beyond.
It goes beyond that, right. So, and it specifically expands the rights to victims, and in some cases, victims' families or relatives that have been directly harmed by the accused. And these rights include to be treated with fairness and respect for the victim's safety, dignity, and dignity and privacy. I'm reading some of these from the actual bill. So what we see is the question is not what I'm reading, which is in the actual bill. That includes proceedings free from unreasonable delay, which we know we can't always avoid.
It's reasonable.
Yeah. Have the safety of the victim and the victim's family considered when setting bail amount and release conditions for the accused. Reasonable and timely notice of public proceedings. We have something similar to that already. Be present. So you have the right to be present at all public proceedings involving criminal conduct, to be heard at all of these proceedings, receive notice of pretrial disposition of the case, except in grand jury, which is secret and under seal, provide information to be considered before the parole of the offender, reasonable protection from the accused, and even those acting on behalf of the accused, the victim or the victim's relatives and family have the right to be protected. Reasonable notice of the release or escape of the accused, refuse an interview, deposition, or other discovery request made by the accused, full and timely restitution from the person or entity convicted, and I can go on and on and on, but it also includes the right to confer with the government's attorney. So there's a lot more here, and remember, these would be part of our state constitution.
And we're not going to see that on the ballot. All the stuff you read is not going to be on the ballot. And the only way you're going to find it is to go back and look at what Marsy's law says in Pennsylvania to find out all of these specific things that once this becomes enacted, all of our judicial employees are going to have to do. So it's not just reading the people who are accused of a crime of their rights. Now we've got a whole other list of things they have to do, and if they don't do it, they're going to have a problem, I would assume.
Yes, because that would be part of our state constitution. And it is another consideration and why certain states have overturned, even after a ballot measure that was approved by the state citizens, it was overturned. In some instances, we see, like in Montana, it was overturned by the state Supreme Court as unconstitutional under the Montana state constitution. Then we've also seen other states that simply didn't pass it out of the legislature, like New Hampshire, because of some of the constraints and issues and potential pitfalls and real considerable problems that could happen should this pass.
Well, this has really been helpful, Jamie, because so far we've seen what the ballot says. We've seen what the law currently is. We've heard from you some of the considerations in the new law. But what exactly now will the kids in school, if this goes forward, read what's been added to the Constitution? So the Constitution isn't going to include all the stuff you just read. What will the Constitution itself say if, in fact, this is approved? Do you know what that's going to say?
Well, it will include the language, some of what I just read, but it will be in Article Section 9.1, Article 1 of our Constitution, and it will talk about due process of victims as well as due process for a defendant. So that's what they'll be learning. They will see the actual bill language. They won't see the question that you and I will see, because they're students. Hopefully one day they will vote, but they will not see the question that you and I see on the ballot referendum.
Well, I think our audience has seen that slide, which has the official language that will be on Section 9A of the Constitution. So I hope our audience is paying attention to that.
I have not memorized it, but it is, the things that I read from are directly from that language that will be included in our state's Constitution.
Well, based on what you know, does the League of Women Voters have a position on this yet?
Well, the League does take positions. I can't tell you as of yet because the League is all about consensus and democracy. And for anybody watching, I urge you, if you're 16 or older, please join the League. It's free for students and only $35 for those who are 35 and under. And that was just a little pitch to make sure you join the League. But we do everything by consensus. So yes, I have advised our board of how we should vote, but we also have a Where We Stand document, and in that is materials about the constitutional amendments, just exactly what we're talking about today. And it does advise us that if we do have statutory language already, like we have with the Crime Victims Act, that maybe we should consider that it isn't necessary. So while we don't have that yet, we definitely, without fail, even if we don't take a stand, we'll have all that information available to everyone on our Vote 411 app. So that's vote411.org. And that allows you to create a ballot, to look up candidates. It's non-partisan, of course, which we at the League are, but it'll also have that information we've discussed today, which is a bit wonky, to make sure that it's accessible to people to figure out whether they want to vote yes or no.
Well, as you go to the polls on November 5th, you're going to have to vote whether to add a new section to the Constitution entitled The Rights of Victims of Crime. You will probably want to ask yourself some of the questions that I've been asking, like, is this ballot referendum really needed, considering we already have a Pennsylvania Crime Victims Act, which you've gone over? And will this litigation result in Pennsylvania about this constitutional amendment as it's done already in 3 other states? Are we going to have to bring the courts into this just on the constitutional amendment itself? And then will there be additional challenges to it? And then how much of the role of the government will be spent protecting victims as well as those of the crime, as well as the defendants, the people accused of the crime as well as those who have been victims of the crime? And finally, as a taxpayer in Pennsylvania, I often wonder what the cost of this is to implement. Not only is it going to be delays in terms of things moving forward in a speedy and efficient manner within our courts, but if we need additional district attorneys, if we need additional clerks to notify people, how is this all going to be done? And I'm sure, like many things else, it doesn't come with a go-to-jail-free card. This
No,
is
it
going
does
to be
not.
expensive.
Yeah, and the lawsuits as well cost us as taxpayers. So if there's any challenge and it does go to litigation, that's going to be on us as well.
I mean, I think constitutional amendments are a big deal, and they shouldn't be underrated. So is there anything else you'd like to add to this, Jamie? It's really been very informative, and it's very complicated, so I'm glad you're here to help.
Well, I appreciate that you're talking about it because so many people don't talk about these ballot referendums, and our clip of what we've discussed today will be on the PA League website, the palwv.org, and then also that vote411.org. I urge everybody to look at that to get this information and really figure it out and sift through it themselves before they go to vote in November.
So, thank you, Jamie. It's been great having you as our guest today. The League of Women Voters is indeed fortunate to have you as a board member. For anyone who wishes to know more about the work of the League, and please go to our website again, palwv.org. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to express my special gratitude to Radnor Studio 21 for their continued support in helping us inform the public about critical issues, such as the referendum regarding victims' rights on the upcoming ballot. Now, to you, our audience, remember to vote on November 5th. Become more informed about the candidates at the League's nonpartisan website, vote411.org. You may also watch for the forums regarding those running for office in your area. Keep your eyes and ears open for more about the referendum on the ballot. Decide whether or not you believe we need to have certain rights for the victims of crimes before you go to the polling place. Remember, voting is your most precious right. Let your voice be heard. Thank you.